I'm calling to order this special operations meeting for the budget. It is January 29th at 6:45 p.m. And we are going to be starting with Mr. Barone and the food service. That is tab 7, right? Or,
Correct.
oh, sorry.
His mic's not on. Your mic's not on.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, okay, so good evening. Mr. Bondi is going to walk us through the food service budget. Tab 7.
Good evening. For the food service proposed budget for 2020-2021, we have revenues of $1,905,140, product cost of $749,583. We have payroll and personnel cost of $1,094,934, and other expenses of $60,533, for a total expense of $1,905,050, with a surplus of $90. For meal counts, for revenue, I should say, the breakfast revenues assumes a slight increase in paid breakfast per day of 10 meals, and lunch revenues assumes an increase of paid lunches of 40 per day. For à la carte and adult revenue, the actual average à la carte revenue per day is, per month I should say, is, I'm sorry, $1,700 per month, with a bump up in December of $3,800. Breakfast reimbursement assumes a 5-cent increase in free and reduced reimbursement rates, and assumes also an increase of free meals served of 16 per day. State grant payments include severe need breakfast payment and healthy food payments, and those are based on the number of meals we served this year. For lunch reimbursements, it assumes a 10-cent increase in free and reduced meal reimbursement and a 1-cent increase in paid reimbursement, and that's a typical rise in reimbursement rates per year from the state. That's not always guaranteed, but it's been typical for the last 3 years.
So, Jim, are you talking about is that the healthy foods
This is the
certification? Gives us a
reimbursement,
penny? No,
the reimbursement for paid meals.
but is that
This
healthy
is not
food?
healthy foods.
No.
This is the actual just a paid meal. You get reimbursed for it. So this is separate. It's
Oh,
not
you're
following the
still talking free and
guidelines.
reduced. Oh, I'm sorry. You're
Yes.
still talking free and reduced. Sorry. I
Yes.
thought you were
Yes.
talking about, I thought you said paid meals. So that's what confused me. I'm sorry.
It's 10 cents for the free and reduced meals, and
Right.
then for every meal purchased, it's 1 cent.
Correct.
So that to me meant the paid meals. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the paid meals, exactly.
I didn't realize we got reimbursed for those.
Oh,
We-
yes.
Yes.
Very little.
Do?
It's,
We
it's,
do.
Yeah, yes, so.
yeah, we're not going to the lottery. We're not covering the
Okay.
25.3%
Yeah.
insurance increase with it.
I think that's the first
But-
time I ever heard that we got reimbursed for regular, I never knew that.
No, we
Yeah,
are
no, it's
reimbursed
very,
for-
very nominal.
For free, reduced, and paid meals, although paid is fairly
A
low.
penny, yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Catering assumes an average of $1,700 per month, again with the bump up in December. For expenses, for food cost, I'm assuming an average of $38% of sales per month would be for food cost. And that does not include all funds from healthy food, breakfast grants, and state match grants. They're not incorporated in revenues when calculating the food cost percentage. For paper cost, I'm assuming a fixed 2% percentage of sales for each month. And again, that does not include the healthy food, breakfast grants, and state match grants when calculating paper cost percentage. Personnel costs, That includes a slight increase in full-time and part-time wages and ancillary costs for next year. And of course, the medical benefits, 25.3% increase for next year. And the operating expenses are based on actual year-end 2019 figures or estimates based on year-to-date. Questions?
So, I actually have a question. Do you?
Yeah, go ahead, I'm pondering.
How are we trending as far as revenue growth this year? Because from the reporting that I see so far, we're trending upwards now,
Correct.
but we had a big dip in the beginning. So the year-to-date is actually lower. So do you think that this year we will end the year on that upward trend of 10%?
I just want to add that last year's numbers are a little inflated because, well, inflated's a bad word, excuse me. But we had a program in the summer last year that generated $23,000 of revenue that we did not have. It was where we had students staying at the high school and basically rehabbing houses. So that's in that revenue number.
Okay.
Under the catering line that would not be this year because we don't have that program.
And that's for 2018 to 19? Or 2019 to 20?
That is for,
Summer
So
of 20.
18, 19.
It was
18,
20,
19.
yeah.
18,
Yeah,
19?
yes.
Okay, so when we're comparing year-to-date to last year's year-to-date, that is a driver, although we are at 28,000 in a deficit right now on food. So we can make it up okay. All right, cool.
that's the goal, yes.
Well, of course, and I mean, because you have the food committee and all of that, and
Yes.
we're planning on expanding breakfasts and
Yes.
stuff.
Mhm.
I can understand, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, so
Mrs. Costelli.
I'm gonna ask my question, so I'm gonna get feisty.
Uh-oh.
So I think, is it the pension that we're unique in that this union, I mean, that our cafeteria workers, that we pay for their pension versus, I know there's an issue with that, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because right now we're at a $77,000 deficit, and I'm looking at this pension line, and it's $86,000. So if we weren't paying pensions, if they were coming from the
Town, like Milford,
coffers of the town, right,
like Milford.
then they would be in the black. So I just want to talk about that a little bit.
I would agree with that assessment, correct. The food service fund pays for their own pension. And that's the number you stated.
Right, but
Yes.
why are they paying? Why is that part of their,
Wallingford has always done that, and again, that's not always just because you've always done something, doesn't mean
Right.
you always should do it. But Meriden is very different. Theirs is, aspects of the food services are paid for by the town. Milford has a similar situation. We had done this long analysis many years ago. It's the way that the town utilizes or its funds, the way that it allocates services. So this has just been Wallingford's process. We have shared this before in several budget hearings, budget meetings with the mayor, especially when we had significant deficits or projected significant deficits. We brought that up. I think this goes back to probably, I want to say 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Around that, I remember having this conversation at our first potluck that we had at the town hall in the little room 215 or 315 up on the third floor. And that was one of the slides, was to talk about the fact that we were concerned, and one of the things was the pensions. So sometimes it depends. Sometimes on the district, the town might pay for the pension, they might pay for their health insurance. It depends. But Wallingford has always done it this way.
okay, so, and I want to acknowledge and thank two of our council members for being here. Mrs. Tata and Mrs. Morgenstein are here tonight listening. And I'm hoping that maybe this is something that could be taken a look at, because that would certainly help our cafeteria be showing that they're actually profitable. And if we're unique in the fact that they have to pay for the pensions, why is that? So, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Votto.
But isn't that because for years, the cafeteria report was always a little separate from the
Board of
main,
Ed. Yeah.
it was presented differently, separately.
Mhm.
And I think there was a time for so many years when they were never in a deficit. So
Right.
maybe there was no inclination to do that.
I would agree. I think that there, you know, if it wasn't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
And I think it wasn't broken for many years, and I'm not saying it is broken, but I think that the times have changed.
Right.
And so what I would want to do, and we can work on this, because Mr. Barone, his professional group, we could put out on listserv. We'd want to redo our list to see what other cafeterias are doing, because maybe things have changed since the last time we looked at this. So we'd want to have a complete understanding so that if we did present, or if we had questions from the town council, we would be best prepared to share that information.
Okay, thanks.
So I have one comment on that same line. I would just point out, because I do this a lot at work, reconfigure how cost is allocated. And, you know, ultimately, while maybe it shouldn't be in the food service line, it's still gonna be in the Board of Ed budget, because there's still education.
Food services isn't in our budget. It's a separate budget. So they're not part of our 4.3% increase.
And but they are part of the overall strategic plan?
Well,
not
we have
when we present it to the mayor, right?
Well, what we've done is for the maintenance items only for food services go under maintenance, like for example, the ovens and stuff like that. We've made that decision. But when it comes, they're an enterprise account, so they take in money, so they're separate from the Board of Education.
Okay,
So it's a little bit different.
okay, all right. Any other questions?
If I may ask, if the board is comfortable with this, could we take consensus on this budget so we could at least check one thing off tonight?
Yes.
It just would be easier, because then Mr. Bondi doesn't have to keep coming out each week too.
I think he wants to be.
So, so we'll start consensus with Mrs. Corso?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
I look forward to seeing that $90 next year.
Mr. Bondi, enjoy your ride home.
So, we're moving on to section 4.
Correct.
Sorry, I inflect a lot, so I sound like I'm asking questions.
No, it's right.
It's,
So-
it's my California roots, you know.
There you go. So
Yeah.
section 4, and most of the board, and Autumn, we went over this already when we met, but the fact is, section 4, just to remind everybody, this is the sustained services budget. Have a good night. This is the sustained services budget. Before we start with that, though, Mr. Barone does have an update, because we try to give you an update if we've been able to drop the sustained at all. Good news is we have. Don't get too excited, because it hasn't been dropped by 25.3%. So we do have an update that we'll pass around. There are a couple of items. We have a staffing change that we're making between programs, so it's a clerical reduction. And nobody's losing their job because there's an open position, so we look to have everybody in a position, but we're just changing the structure, so there is a nominal savings there. And then we also were made aware just yesterday that there's some utility savings, that the rates that we had been initially told by the town were going to take into effect for increases on certain utilities are now decreased. So we wanted to provide that. So I'll wait till Mr. Barone gets back to the microphone and he can explain what he just handed out to you.
Okay, so I just wanted to roll back to the utilities. I want to clarify, we weren't told there was a rate increase. I made an assumption on the electricity, and because as you know, we put our budget together, we start 5 weeks ago or so. And in this month, we got the mayor's letter, and it was actually a decrease of 1.5%. So we went back and recasted the electricity, and then with the position that we talked about, or that Dr. Menzel spoke about, we were able to realize some savings there. And so what I did was I took, and I just recast the high-level budget, and I tried to bold the areas that were impacted by that. And so the personnel services is gonna be about a $15,978 savings. The employee benefits of $12,021, and then in the purchase property services, 400, that's where our electricity is, and we think there's gonna be $15,112 in savings in that line. So really, what we did, this is basically our object report that we put in every year, and I just added a new set of columns to the right called revised sustained budget, and you can see it decreased down to a 4.27%. Any questions?
Exactly, at least it's going in the right direction. So, at this time, what we'll do is if we want to go through, section 4, so it's in section 4, we'll start with page 1, and we'll take questions as we go through.
And just to clarify, that the section 4 has not been updated to reflect the handout.
Of course, yeah.
So if you try to compare it, you can't compare it to the revised sustained column, you have to compare it to the one that just says sustained budget in the middle of this document.
Mrs. Corso?
Yes, thank you. When we're hiring our college interns, they act as the building sub, is that correct? And then we are paying the universities. So are we paying, like social security and things like that or we're just paying a stipend to the universities? How does that compare to hiring a building sub on our own? What we're paying the universities compared to whether we had to pay a building sub and include all the taxes that go along with that?
The daily rate for a building sub it starts out at $80, and then gradually over time, it increases. So when we did the math, and we can give you the specific calculation of this, but the last time we did this, which I believe was 2 years ago, there was a significant savings by going with the interns. Because we're not accruing those additional expenses, plus the fact is that there's an added cost because it comes out to almost up to $125 a day, and the interns are not $125 a day. They're significantly lower. The challenge is we would love to have more interns, to be honest, but there's oftentimes we get as many as we can.
Okay.
That's our goal, and that's why you'll notice on here, I think we even have a Fairfield University scenario, because we were trying to expand a little bit, but it's difficult. They're a hot commodity, as and you probably know in your position. The interns are really a value because we also grow potential candidates for jobs, and that's a great thing to have. But we can rerun the numbers, but I know the last time we did it, there was a cost savings.
The other cost potential is that we could get unemployment if we from the subs. We've had them file for unemployment, and we have to pay that the way. For a sub, yeah. And I'm not sure if everybody knows how our unemployment works. Unlike a typical business that pays a percentage of their payroll, we actually pay the claims. So when somebody files, we're responsible for some or all of the claim up to a certain cap.
Because we're a nonprofit. Is that right?
I believe it's because we're a government versus, I'm not sure of the IRS, rate distinguishing factor, but I know that municipalities, we pay it that way. I think it has to do because we have elected officials sometimes, but I don't know the whole history on it, but I just know how we pay it.
Thank you.
Ms. Corso, just because you know me, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to math. So if you do the simple math, A building sub, even if we only paid a person, a regular sub, $80 a day for 183 days, it's $14,640. Now, we know that's more than that. If we take our full line item here of the interns, and there's at least 12 in our district, that's only $9,250. So it's approximately $5,000 savings at the very least per intern by doing it this way. In addition, again, it's those other costs. So that's just the quick math, but it's pretty good.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Mr. Votto?
The interns, are they here every day, full-time?
Yes.
So there's a benefit right there.
Yeah.
Because if you don't need them to sub on that particular day, they're in the building and they're available to do other things for you as well. You know, sit down with a child and reading to a child or something like that. So that's the other benefits, I believe. You must know that.
Mrs. Corso?
Do we offer, like, incentivize coming here by saying, if you intern with us, you automatically get an interview for an open position, something like that? Because I wouldn't mind seeing an increase in interns to decrease the
Agreed.
need for subs. We could do something like if you're looking at an internship, well, at least interview, you guaranteed an interview, not a job, just you're guaranteed an interview for an open position.
I believe that most of our principals do that. We can discuss that further, but that has been my experience, that they do get that interview.
Thank you.
Mrs. Purcell?
Oh, along that same line, are there other universities that we can tap besides just Fairfield and Quinnipiac that offer something like that?
We could take a look at Central and Southern.
I mean, we do hire a lot of teachers from Central and Southern, so it might
Correct.
make sense.
We had checked into, we had some from UConn when in psychology in the years past. Oftentimes it's geographically it's a disadvantage because UConn students, but Southern and Central are closer.
Right.
Because we even investigated University of Hartford
Okay.
and also St. Joe's, because St. Joe's has a great special education certification. So we tried to tap into that because we knew we were going to be having turnover. But again, they become a little bit more disadvantaged in terms of geography, but the Central and Southern could definitely be looked at.
Mrs. Raccio?
I do know that my family has had a central intern before, so, and then the intern the teacher went out on a leave and the intern stayed to kind of handle that short-term leave, so central has been used within the past 5 years.
Depends on, again, the program and the situation, but I know that we've looked at this from a variety of angles, because as Ms. Corso said, it is a good opportunity, and as we just quickly did the math, it's a savings. And a college student who's doing this for credit, and for, the opportunity to earn, this experience, they're going to be more likely to be here every day. And then we don't have to worry about filling in, so to speak.
Any other questions? Mr. Ross? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, on cafeteria monitors, contractual, does that include, like hallroom monitors, like at Sheehan, they have monitors outside in the senior court every day? Does that include them or not?
No, the cafeteria monitors, the ones that are on this page, those are for the elementary schools and the middle schools. Those aren't certified staff members. Those are people that are hired on a part-time basis.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, if there are no more questions, we'll move on to page 2. Any questions? All right, page 3.
I feel the necessity, or the need rather, to just further explain the 25.3%. increase for insurance on page 3, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I know that question has come up a lot from a variety of people. So the 25 point, I'm going to explain this. The 25.3% increase is a rate increase. Being a self-insured account, our rate is a combination of experience as well as the need to have a reserve, because we're responsible for claims as they come in. Over the last 2 years, we've had 31 significant claims that went above the stop loss. Our stop loss is $200,000. So when you have 31 claims, and this is between the Board of Education and the town, this is for everybody. We're all together. We're one big happy family. So the thing is that if you have $200,000 times 31, it's over $6 million. And that's a tremendous amount of money that has to be drawn from the reserve in order to keep us solvent. So what we have to do is, and this happens, unfortunately, these are not planned. These are not definitely situations that the people going through them or their families would ever want. We have to, though, make up the reserve. So as part of that, and this is all part of rates, it's not a separate thing. This is all part of our rates. This is when you do self-insurance, your rate is a combination. So that's where we are right now. So the fact is that we're dealing with the actual cost of the insurance, which is those two parts. And that's why the increase is so significant, because we've had unfortunate circumstances for some of our staff members across both the town and the school district. We're hopeful. I speak to the mayor about this every single week, and he's been incredibly supportive. And we've really, the team has come together, Dominic, Danielle, myself, the mayor, Mr. Bose, Mr. Senna, and Mr. Hutt. We've met consistently. We're hopeful that this number could adjust down, but we're not certain as to when that's going to occur. And we unfortunately drew the short straw. As I said to the mayor, I said, thanks, I get to go first and be the bearer of great news. And then, every other department could come in maybe a month later when the percentage isn't as high. But that's just the reality. So we're hopeful, and we will see if we're potentially going to get another update in February. So there might be a reduction at that point, and then we'll get updates every month thereafter, as the board is aware, or usually aware of that. That's the way we do it.
Mrs. Costelli, then Mrs. Purcell, then Mrs. Corso.
Hi. A couple questions. 25.3, is that a crossword for all?
It's for
all-
every union.
In other words, just because we have a bigger staff doesn't mean we pay a bigger
No,
percentage?
it's a flat rate across all
Town.
unions, town and
Right.
Board of
Okay,
Education.
that's a good thing. You said 31 significant claims. Did you say over the past several years? Or did you
Past
say
2 years.
Past 2
This year and
years?
last year.
So I still am confused, and this is not directed at you, Dr. Menso. I'm still confused as to why on December 13th, we thought the figure was 10%, and now all of a sudden, it's 25%.
Again, we have new insurance consultants, so they were still running the numbers. And so the first numbers they ran, based on the data that they had to review at that point, indicated a lower percentage increase. And then they were given additional numbers from different departments
Okay.
that then changed that.
So it's the transition of the
And it was
team
just
that
new
caused-
data that was provided to them. So we were hopeful. One of the board members asked about another bordering district, about what their percentage increase was, and it, Southington, they're self-insured also, their percentage increase was only 4%.
Right.
If
Again,
we
that-
only had a
it's gonna depend
4%
on
increase,
experience, so,
our
right.
sustained service budget would only be 2.1, which would have been pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, understood. Thank
Mrs.
you.
Purcell.
Okay. I don't totally understand how self-insured works, so you kind of have to bear with me a little bit. But you said that there's a rate, and then there's like a, pool
it's all
reserve.
considered the rate. Your rate is established by the fact that you have to pay for claims.
Right.
So if you have large claims a
Right.
given year, you have to replenish your ability to pay those claims. So that's why the rate goes up totally.
Because we go through Anthem still, though, correct?
Correct. There are
So-
service
So
provider,
we're paying
but
Anthem a certain amount of money, correct? On top of that?
Yes.
It's,
Yes,
They
yes,
process
yes,
our
yes, yes,
transactions,
yes,
so
yes.
we pay for
Administrative
that.
services, yes, you
Alright.
have to
Yeah.
pay.
But we own the
6%.
risk
No,
on
I
the
get the
claims.
risk
it's,
part.
because fully insured is a little bit different.
Well, the reason I ask, and I'm just asking this because before you were here, Dr. Manzo, there was a situation with the healthcare went up every year, and it was just being passed down, and it never went back out to bid for many years, and we had to force that issue. And I'm just wondering, is that playing into it because we have Anthem? Are their rates going up, or is it just totally the pool, the reserve?
It's primarily our claims that,
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have, there are some administrative fees, but the claims are the significant piece. And then if the revenue doesn't match the claims, we have a deficit, then that reduces the reserve.
Okay.
And the reserve has to be at a certain amount for us to be able to have this fund.
All right, so going out to bid wouldn't make a difference in this situation.
From what we've been shared with, and I believe what the mayor has also in front of him, which is the same thing, it's not, again, about the insurance company itself. It's just that we've had
Okay,
unfortunate circumstances.
all right.
Mrs.
thank you.
Corso?
Do we have the ability to use a 1% fund to replenish our reserve?
That question has been asked of the mayor by me, and I'm waiting to hear further response on that.
Thank you.
And could they match from their reserve?
Again, I can't speak for them. That I asked that of the mayor actually prior to, the week after we got back from Christmas. So
Well, I wonder if it would be cheaper to do it that way. Would that be overall cheaper to replenish it with that than pay the 25.3% increase? Have we looked at that?
well, there's no cost differential because it's real money. So
Right, but it would decrease that
Oh.
25%.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. So you, for example, if you, I know the money that is available right now in our 1% would be what we had allocated for special ed over expenditures. So it's about $650 or so $1,000. So say the board chose to not use all $650,000, but say we wanted to use $300,000 to reduce the 25.3% increase, that would reduce it, and it would obviously have impact on us. Again, I shared that with the mayor. I believe it was January 2nd or 3rd. I said, can we look at this? He wanted to see where we end up. I agree with him. It's a little premature for us to jump there because I think he wants to make sure the numbers that we're getting are as low as they can go. So I respect what he's doing. But he knows that that's something. I immediately went there because ironically enough, that was at the same time, around the same time that we were getting, I don't want to say criticized, but maybe questioned as to why there was still money in the 1% account. So there might be a reason that we have that money there that this could help, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Mrs. Raccio and then Mrs. Castelli.
Thank you. And we did use $100,000 out of the 1% fund for
Previous
insurance
years.
last year.
Yep, and we
Okay.
have done that, and it was the same thing to build up the reserve. So precedent had been set. I think it's just a matter, and I totally agree with the mayor, that it's too soon to determine what would be the right amount, if at all we're going to do that.
Mrs. Castelli?
So, Mr. Barone, our benefit year is July through June.
Correct.
So that's what we're really waiting for, to see how many more claims are going to come in as close to April at least. Well, still,
Exactly,
we
'cause
won't
you
have
have-
all of them, but,
Correct.
okay, so that might help to reduce
Correct.
this issue. Okay.
Correct.
I have a question also. When we talk in terms of claims, if I have a catastrophic illness, if you will, and my claim in 1 year supersedes that 200,000, the next year does that renew essentially?
You have to start all
Yeah,
over
resets
again.
So-
the- yeah,
So the
So
board
it could
and
be
the-
somebody who is continuously sick over 2 periods.
Unfortunately,
and we know
yes.
how
Correct.
much
Yeah.
a lot of those medications
It-
cost, unfortunately.
Correct. So it doesn't,
okay.
it resets every year. So it
Got
doesn't,
it.
once you reach that threshold, it doesn't mean that you don't have
No.
to start again.
It's
I
not a
just-
lifetime
I just-
out of-
yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to page 4. questions here? Mrs. Levack?
Yes, I'm looking at Object Code 323. Are we expecting, under blind and physically handicapped students, I like to say students that may have blind and physically handicapped conditions, anticipated increase in needs? Could that be explained just a bit? Thank you, Mrs. Turk.
This is actually a cost that we have encountered due to a student who's moved into district. So it is something that we're actualizing this year that's going to carry on to next year.
Thank you.
Mrs. Corso?
We had hired those BCBA/preschool teachers, I believe, and now it looks like we're getting rid of our in-district BCBAs,
You got it?
replacing 2 BCBAs with teachers. No.
No, actually, so we do have 2 BCBAs that we have hired that are district employees. In addition to that, we contract out for 2 BCBAs. So we actually have 2 3/4 BCBAs right now, FTE. What we're going to do is no longer contract out BCBA services. We would like to hire a third BCBA in district and use the money that we're using to contract to use their district employee.
Okay.
So on the presentation last week, there was a reallocation of staff, and it said how we were taking the contracted services. There's no added cost to the Board of Education. We're just not going to outsource that service. We're going to hire our own, and it's the same amount of money. But
I'm
we
just
just
looking,
figured-
it says we'll be replacing 2 BCBAs with teachers.
Yes,
Right.
with
The
because they're special
BCBAs
ed
that are
teachers.
contracted.
We're replacing the contracted BCBAs with hired
With-
teachers on our
Okay,
staff.
with our, I gotcha, so the
Right, because-
BCBAs that are under the teacher's contract,
Yes.
not actual teachers.
So we'll have
Exactly.
3 of our own, but
Got it.
you're right. The good news is our BCBAs are also special ed certified,
Right.
which is key.
And Mr. Ross?
Athletic field trips at the high school, is that just 2 games, or is that something separate?
So that's to the games. It's going up in cost by
Yeah.
$6,000, yes.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions on this page? Moving on to page 5. Any questions here? No? Moving on to page 6. Questions here? Okay, seeing none, page 7. Any questions here?
Yeah, no, I
Mrs.
just,
Purcell?
I mean, I submitted my question already, and you gave me the
Yeah, if you-
breakout. But I mean, is that, and there was a difference, but does that mean that we're not gonna look at it in future years, or we don't know?
No, it doesn't mean that we can't look at it in the future years. The question, why don't, just because the public doesn't know what you were asking. So what Ms. Purcell had asked was, in reference to bringing back custodial services, not contracting out services in the evenings at our elementary schools and our
The
high schools. Oh, at the high schools, I'm sorry, at the high schools. When we look at just the high schools, there is and I don't know, Mr. Deptula, why don't you go through it, because you worked on this.
Thank
Okay,
you.
there are a lot of hidden costs and small costs that may not factor into this, but you can clearly see that there's a substantial difference between having our own staff and outsourced staff. One of the things that we routinely run into with cleaning contractors is failures. Either we have to throw a contractor out, or they leave on their own. But either way, that's a costly proposition, because typically it takes 2 months to get a new staff online, and during that time, Our union staff is filling in and performing that work. We also have some damages that are caused to buildings. It's hard to quantify those damages. Our buildings age quicker when they're being cleaned by contractors. We see it all the time. Sometimes it's very incremental, sometimes it's obvious. When it's obvious, we make proper deductions. Currently, the vendor that we put, that I removed from the system from the 2 high schools this summer, we're still dealing with that vendor, and they've damaged millwork, they damaged floors to the tune of, I think the floor in the auditorium at Lyman Hall is around $20,000, so we've held that, and we're going to replace that floor this summer, but that may be a problem for the vendor. They obviously want to get as much money out of us as they can, but they also damaged millwork at both high schools. That millwork has since been repaired, and it's now got a painted finish as opposed to a clear finish, which aesthetically might actually be considered to be better. But these are all things that we've dealt with, myself, my custodial staff, my maintenance guys. So a lot of those costs are not included in this picture. And
However, we're not certain that they're going to equal almost $100,000.
Yeah, I don't,
Well,
That's
you're
the
looking at-
challenge. Because it's $67,000 more.
So for the board, it's the last page of your questions, if you're. if you-
Yeah, so it's a order to hire, or to the contracted services right now for people watching at home is $331,778. If the Board of Education hired its own staff, not including pension, which we have to be cognizant
Right,
of,
Right.
that's $399,059. So there would be an additional cost 1 year. Remember, the wage increases occur over time for our employees, of additional cost of $67,281, plus a pension liability the first year of $12,748. So the total increase would be approximately $80,000 approximately.
But what we don't have here is how much you paid your employees to fix some of the problems that they had to fix. So we were out, because we're out that money. So that
Correct.
line should show in here also.
and like I say, we do our best to make those deductions. We even deduct if a contract calls for a set amount of hours and the vendor does not meet those hours for the month, we actually make deductions based
So-
on that also.
But this 331 doesn't show those.
So no, so what
Deductions.
Mark is
Some-
saying
Okay.
is that we're not, that 331, actually, we're not paying 331. Because what happens is he charges them, like we're doing with the bus company, Mr. Ross asked earlier, are we paying extra for what they're trying to do to solve their problem?
Okay,
We're transferring the cost to them.
okay.
With them, we would get a credit. So this 331 would not be fully expended. It would be used to pay for the additional expenses that we're paying for our employees. Because that's a great question and great point. But we're not getting double penalized. We're not paying them the full contract plus having to pay our employees. We're charging them or discounting their contract to cover our expenditures.
But we're also not satisfied with the work, true, that we're getting or not?
We're not satisfied all the time. The current vendor that we have at Lyman Hall, I haven't received one email or one complaint about since they took over.
Okay.
They were the previous vendor, and they do a good job. And the contractor that's cleaning Sheehan is a local vendor who's very responsive and does an acceptable job.
The other challenge sometimes with trying to do this analysis is that when you look at our hiring our own staff, and actually we were just talking about this today, our maintenance staff is incredible. They're by far just an incredible group of people. Unfortunately, they are also sometimes, because of the nature of their work, people that get hurt because of the nature of the duties that they have. So you have to also factor in what is our workers' comp aspect of this, because that also does factor in with this unfortunate slips, trips, falls, carrying a box and something gets tweaked. So those are the other parts. They're hard to really pin down.
No, I get it, but I mean, we do it at the middle school, and yet the high schools are the ones that are used much, much more. Those buildings are much more abused, let's say, you know, because of usage. So that's why I was concerned about maybe having our own people there.
It's something I think we can continue to look at. I don't think we should stop looking at it.
Okay.
But again, I think the good news is I think Lyman Hall is in a good place now. I think we're turning the corner.
We can refine this over time, and I will do that. But some of these things are very, like I say, they're very tricky to extract and show you the pluses and minuses. And some of them, in most cases, these items aren't worth considering because Dr. Menzo mentioned workman's comp, and that's a factor. We have had some employees go out on long-term comp. It's the fact of doing business, really.
Mr. Ross and then Mr. Votto.
Well, my question's sort of been answered, but I'll ask it anyway. Given the history of the dissatisfaction with the contractors and the problems with them, why are we still using outside contractors? Thank you.
It really comes down to a cost. We know that our labor costs are higher and always will be. We do run into issues, you know, a lot of, right now, the labor market in this area, it's very hard to get competent minimum wage workers that can pass a background check. The last company that had Sheehan and Lyman Hall, that was one of their biggest problems, was getting those workers. At least 25% of the people that they brought through my doors ended up with felony records. So
They
it's
did
very-
not end up in our schools. I want to make that very clearly. Because, no, I'm not trying to be funny because people cherry pick what they listen to
Yeah.
sometimes at our meetings. So again, and Mr. Deptul is much more soft-spoken than I am, so I don't want to have him be misconstrued either. Those people might have entered his office, but they didn't enter our school doors. And his office is not on our school, in his school. So I just want to make that very, very clear.
Mr. Votto?
How many, say the contractor for Lyman Hall, how many workers are there? I mean, during the day and at night?
Typically at night, there would be 6 or 7, somewhere around there. During the day, they provide 2 porters, usually a female and a male, that will maintain bathrooms and things during the working day. So it's really probably a total of 8 contracted employees.
So, and that contract is how much?
The $331,000 for both high schools.
That's for.
Oh, that's for
the
one high school,
yeah.
sorry, I apologize, for one high school.
As opposed to hiring 8 people?
Yes.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
would anticipate adding 6 people to the Lyman Hall staff to clean that building primarily at night.
Yeah, I saw that.
So again, to Mr. Ross's question, we could do anything if we have money to do it. So if you, as a board, want us to put this in the sustained services budget, you know, as we move forward and hopefully conclude our discussions next week on the budget, we're more than welcome to do that. And I'm not saying that you were saying to do that, but I'm just saying that these are, unfortunately, a lot of it is trying to sustain the services that are in the classroom. And I know that obviously a clean classroom is important to the environment. However, if you look at $70,000, $80,000, that's a lot of money.
Well, my only reason for the question is I'm hearing that we're paying less, but we're getting less. And when it comes to students, we don't want to get less.
Yeah, unfortunately, and that's what you get with lowest bid sometime in all things that we do in the town.
My concern, exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
Mrs. Purcell?
And even when I proposed the question, I didn't expect it this year, but I would have liked to seen it in future years in the strategic plan so we can start to think about maybe rolling, even a little, even if we did one school 1 year and another school another year later or whatever, just to
Again,
eventually build
I
up.
think that we need to do a more, a long scale, a projected
Okay.
analysis, because this is a moment in time, but we
Right.
have to factor in a 3% compounding salary increase
Sure.
on average. And I think we need to do a 3 to 5 year projection, looking at the average contracts, because many of the contracts don't have significant increases every year, but our salaries do.
Okay.
So I just would want to, and I don't mean to give Mr. Barone and Mr. Deptul a lot of extra work, but I would say, I agree that we should put this in the strategic plan at the very least, because I think that's, I'm in agreement with you. But I think before we make any real decisions, it would be really good to see a 3 to 5 year
Okay. Yeah,
kind
I
of
agree.
perspective.
I would agree, and I would also think that as part of that, we would want to do a cost-benefit analysis, which it would include all of those deductions, because I mean, if you're deducting and you're having to essentially babysit to process deductions and then wait for the chargeback to be approved, because that's how it works when you deduct, and they're not going to accept the whole amount because technically students were using the floors in Lyman Hall, so they can't be responsible for all of the damage. You know, I know how that works too, but we need to make sure that whatever we're replacing as a result, even if we're getting some money back from deductions, that we include that in a cost-benefit analysis, because it might not be a bad idea to start looking at it, but until we have that broad picture, we're really not going to know. So, I mean, I agree with you that maybe not this year, because we're already kind of crippled by the insurance and stuff like that, but maybe we start to investigate those possibilities. And as we know, when you have like a full-time job and you have benefits, a lot of times you take better care of things. And when you know that if you work for a contracted service, everybody has to get their money. So the service is getting some part of the contracted fee. So those people are actually making less than if we were to divide this out by 8. So people would have a better buy-in, you know, to their own work if they know that they're getting something immediately out of it. So, Mrs. Raccio.
I don't disagree with that, but I think in the analysis, we also do have to consider the workers' comp, the medical insurance, and then if somebody's out on workers' comp, we just talked about what happens when somebody doesn't come to work. We have to look at substitutes also, because the last thing we want to do is have teachers, principals, other people in the building have to empty garbage cans and do those type of activities.
Definitely agree. Any further questions on this page? Seeing none, we'll move on to page 8. I actually have a question on this page. So we have a contractual 9% increase with the new bid. This is through Durham again. Is there going to be any change in this due to
The bid has not been awarded to any company.
Okay,
Because again, when we were developing this budget with the insurance, first of all, number one, we are, going back to my comment, and Mr. Ross agreed with it, is that we're obligated to go with the lowest qualified bidder.
sure.
So at the time of developing the budget, the lowest qualified bidder was 9%, a 9% increase to present services. But nothing has been awarded. We're still processing that and having conversations with the town, and figuring out what our next steps are in that. But that's how we came about by putting the 9% in the budget.
So when companies come back with bids, their name is attached to them. So like we know who this bid
Yeah,
is.
it's Durham,
Okay.
but it hasn't been I just want to again make it clear.
No, totally. I
wasn't awarded
understand.
yet.
Totally.
That's a
And-
public document on the procurement website too.
Yeah,
It
anybody
has
can
all
go grab that.
There were
Okay.
4, I could send it through.
Yeah, just, or shoot me a link or whatever.
We
I
have,
can figure
we
it
had
out.
4 responses.
Okay.
And 3 were accepted.
Okay. So, then my further question is, given the talk we just had, in our special meeting, do you think, do we know what's changing with a possible 9% increase? Or are some of these incentives now baked into this rate increase that I presume we're going to be paying?
I don't know, Mr. Barone, you've been more intimately involved in that.
I would, they baked in some of the the pay rate,
Sure.
we, you know, we couldn't say it till they came out and said it. They actually, I think they early implemented it though. I think they were planning on doing it in July. I would also add that we had a 5-year bid, and last year was year 6. We did extend with them at a 0% increase. So
Okay.
that's making it a bigger jump because theoretically it should have went up a couple
I
percent.
see.
All right, and then, you know, it was 9% pretty much across the board on a lot of the different items, but the biggest driver is the home to school routes. That's
Sure.
the biggest driver.
And then my final question on this line, I'm sorry. Now that you've mentioned tiered increases, would this, I can probably just look at the procurement website, and that's probably a question for a different day, but would this be a tiered increase year over year? That we would, like, would it be 9% now, 9% later, next year, et cetera?
I believe it's 3%, but I would have to check. It's not 9% every year.
So
as I say.
it's basically a depreciating increase.
Well, I
or-
think typically what happens is when you go out after 5 years, the costs have gone up more than
Sure.
the contract. So you always get a little bit of a bump. I think we experienced a little more of a bump because we
had
did
zero.
we did take the 0.
Okay,
And but you know the information's all out there, and you know,
Okay.
we can get that.
I'll check it out. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, moving on to page 9. Any questions here? Okay, seeing none, page 10. Anything here? Nope, page 11. Mrs. Levac?
Under 611 instructional supplies, do we have an idea of how many, are we still testing all students with all sets?
No, we only test 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 7th grade.
And that's it?
That's it.
And that's the cost increase noted here?
The cost increase there is 3rd grade uses the paper booklets, and those they have an additional fee for scoring. So that's the cost of the scoring.
Thank
We have
you.
paid that in the past, but we just haven't budgeted appropriately, so that's why there's a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Purcell?
Yeah, I had a question on student allocations, and I've read your answers. My question still stands. I know we have a student allocation for elementary and then a different price for middle school and then a different price for high school, and I'm not sure why. Why do high school students get more money than elementary school students or middle school?
Some of it has to do with just the cost of the supplies. When you think about a science classroom in the high school,
Yeah.
their supplies are infinitely more expensive than what you would need in an elementary classroom in terms of chemicals and microscopes and all of those things.
And those aren't
So-
covered under any kind of curriculum expenses?
No, those are generally, it is a process by which curriculum will budget for some K-8 supplies, usually in the special area. When I came on board 3 years ago, we have purchased instructional equipment that would be very difficult to budget for through the school level allocation. So for example, CTE. You know, Rob Covey will reach out to his department. They need drills and hammers and screwdrivers, et cetera, that cannot generally be purchased out of the allocation. Computer science, we budget K-8 for things like headphones and mice because they are more expensive. But the general day-to-day supplies that the teachers may use at the middle and high level are budgeted through the building allocations, and they work with their building principals. So for example, the science department in the middle school might, and these are not actuals from
Yeah.
the top of my head, but might, budget $2,000 for the different supplies they need to go along with their units. The elementary science supplies are funded through the curriculum department, through the Science Resource Center. So they don't have to use any of their building allocation money for the snails that we buy, the butterflies that we buy. I mean, the stuff that Kate O'Donnell buys, I get her lists, and, there's Matchbox cars for things that we're doing with Force in Motion, and there's fish and bugs and snails and slugs and all of those things that we use for some of our units. And so we purchase those because it's easier to do it in bulk and we know what we need to purchase. High school will do the same. The department heads work closely with their departments and they submit a budget to their building principals and they're allocated, money to purchase the everyday consumable items that they need. Bigger things, curriculum will budget for. So, we work really closely with the building principals. We try very hard to budget in advance as much as we possibly can so that I'll take over some of the needs of the buildings K-12 and some of it comes from the building.
Right.
Your question also dealt with textbooks and why there was money in both places.
Mm-hmm.
So textbooks is something that the curriculum department will budget for when we purchase the first batch of books. Year to year enrollment shifts change. So if additional purchases are necessary due to shifts in enrollment within the classes, first, each school checks with one another. If Sheehan needs 20 algebra textbooks, they'll check with Lyman Hall, do you have 20 extra? The buildings do budget for the first 10, and then curriculum picks up the rest. So, it kind of depends.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm still going to question it because some of the things you're talking about are things that can be reused, like in science and stuff. They're, the microscopes and all those types of things where in an elementary level, they're definitely, every year you have to a lot of that stuff has to be rebought or reused.
Right.
It's used up. And it just seems like the percentage is just very large from one level to the next. And I understand you have more students. I get that. So it gives you a bigger budget, but I just feel that all teachers should be able to equally kind of get what they need, and I'm just concerned that the elementary level is not getting as much, and the middle school is not getting as much, and is that allocation, has it changed over the last so many years? Have we looked at it, or do we need to relook at it again?
It's changed slightly. It has not changed significantly. In places that it has changed more moderately would be in the areas of the special area, art, music, PE, because theirs was much lower, relatively speaking, and so we upped that, especially art, because they, the cost of paint and glaze and clay is very, very expensive. So K-8, we did bump up their allocation, and as I stated, in the last few years, the coordinators have really taken a lead on talking to their department when they're crafting their budget. The curriculum budget has shifted a lot in the last 3 years, where you'll see, larger sums of money in the area of instructional supplies or textbooks, because textbooks is also where you get level text in there. It's not really a textbook, but it's not an instructional supply, it's level text. Instructional equipment to take the weight of that expense off the buildings. And that's K-12, so.
Mrs. Costelli?
So just to kind of tag on to that, I would assume VOAG also plays a part in some sort of supplies, yes? Would that fall into that category, or is it different?
They do a lot of their purchasing through their grant as well.
Okay, but I mean, so
So
it's
it's
not part of
separate.
this bucket? Okay.
Mr. Votto?
I know I should probably know the answer to this after all these years, but anyhow, going back to what Patty's concern is, how much does each elementary school principal get allocated for the general supplies? Is it the same for every school?
It's a per student cost. So if they're in, it's
It's based on the number of students?
yes.
And secondly, are the teachers given, is it up to the principal to decide how that money is divvied out?
Yes. However, elementary works very closely together so that there's consistency with what a classroom teacher receives as an allocation, what a librarian may receive, EL teacher, bilingual teacher, et cetera. They all try to keep it very, very consistent, with the exception of library books, because everybody's collection is a little bit different. So that may vary, but it doesn't vary to a great extent. They're within, you know, maybe $500 of each
But
other.
what they would say to a teacher, all their teachers, you can use out of this allocation $200 for whatever you need in your classroom.
Yes.
Unless it was something very, like you were trying to say before, something very extraordinary, something that they wouldn't use day to day.
Right. So every teacher will get a set amount for the allocation for instructional supplies that are consumable, the paper, the pens,
Right.
the markers, et cetera. And then they'll use the remaining dollars of their allocation after they've dispensed their money to each teacher in the building for things that are at their discretion. So if fourth grade, you know, goes to them and says, oh gosh, we really found this great instructional supply for this particular unit that we would really like, they use some of their allocation to fund that, because
Not the
the-
curriculum? They can't go to
It
the
dep-
curriculum for that?
they could, and they do.
Okay. Okay.
It depends.
That's
There
fine.
are building level needs and then there's district level
Right.
needs. So we've come a long way in the last 3 years to make sure that there's equity between the schools.
Yeah, that's good.
So if I'm buying leveled text for one school because they said, oh my gosh, we really need more of this type of text,
Mhm.
then we poll all 8 schools to say, I have a little bit of extra money in grants or otherwise, what do you need? Because every year your student population is a little bit different. If somebody finds a great resource that aligns really well to this social studies unit, we talk about it so that all schools will benefit from that
Yeah,
really
it's a good
great
idea.
resource. But sometimes there is a very specific school need that a grade level may go to that principal just based on the school's need, and they have money left over in their allocation for those purposes. But if it is a curricular need for 3rd grade, then we're gonna budget so that every 3rd grade teacher has it. We did that for social studies last year, we do that for science, we've done that in ELA and math continuously through the years, and it's not really any different in middle or high school either.
Thank you.
Mrs. Purcell.
All right, I just wanted to help you with a little bit here, Mike. I went through and I looked at all the instructional supplies for every school, and I put it on a spreadsheet. And our smallest school is getting $12,256 in instructional, and I don't, our smallest,
Ms. Purcell, we would want to review your numbers, because
Okay.
we don't believe we believe there's
they're
some
taken
changes.
directly out of here, for
But you
sure.
have to understand, the high school, also their allocations include some athletic pieces,
Okay, but
so that the elementary schools would never
you
have.
could still, you're right, you were correct with that. I'm just telling you, it's 12,000 something. I don't know how many students, 200 and something, maybe is a small school. Your largest school is getting 163,000. That's 13 times amount. So you take out, that's why I asked you,
But
take
that's
out the
not-
pieces
Yeah.
that are listed under instructional supplies that aren't instructional supplies that you're saying, that's fine, but it just seems like it's really out of whack.
If you go to the budget book that you get first at the budget process, which I don't think any of you have with you tonight, but if you go to that page, it shows the allocations, it shows the number of students. That's the page you should be working off of. That
So-
doesn't include,
So this itemized thing that you're giving us is not correct?
no, it's not that it's not correct, but your number is incorrect.
Okay.
I think one of the things that, it's not just the 611A, because
I-
there is an allocated amount that everybody gets, then each building can request a non-allocated amount by object code.
Okay.
And then I budget using the 100, 200, 3 elementary, middle, or high 611A. So, you know, looking at your spreadsheet, I have no doubt that your numbers are from the 611A account. It's
But-
just who budgeted for those numbers and what the purpose
Okay.
for, because you didn't put account code, so it was really hard for us to.
They're all 611A only instructional supplies. I didn't put any
I know, but that's just
non-instructional
the
or anything
object-
else.
That's just the object code. I don't know what the location code is or the program
So the
code that goes with
description,
it.
so this description is not accurate then? Instructional supplies is not what it is?
No, I'm sure it is
Okay.
instructional supplies. It depends
Okay.
on where the cost center is, whether it's high school or it's language arts or it's not necessarily by school. So the
Okay.
budget book that was passed out at the beginning of the year, the budget season, has on one of the very few first pages, has each school, their projected enrollment, and then the per student allocation.
Okay.
So that's the building allocation.
That's the building allocation?
Yes, and
So
that is
these-
consistent.
So these that are inside here, some of it's coming from your budget?
It could vary, yes,
Okay.
like English language
That's
arts will
right.
budget 611A.
Okay.
So we'll
Your number-
optimize for the district.
Your number was accurate, but it just included everything under the sun for 611.
Well,
That's,
everything in each school, yeah. Okay.
no, but also every single department. So that included central office, that included from curriculum budget too.
Even though it was listed under that particular school?
It depends.
Depends, yeah.
Sheehan, the planetarian of Sheehan falls
Under
under the
Sheehan.
curriculum budget, even though it's Sheehan's program code.
Okay.
It's just a little tricky,
Miss-
so, again, with your spreadsheet, it was wonderful. It just, I don't know where the account codes are to help be able to decipher the equity that's there.
Well, I
You know
guess
what I mean?
to make the whole thing easier, if you just said, you know, teachers got $300 at elementary and they got $700 at, you know, that would be a really simple way to do it, and then you wouldn't have to go through all this.
Well, the elementary does do it that way. The middle school does do it a little bit differently, because every department budgeted, they request a different amount of money to their building principal. So the English Language Arts Department at the middle school might request something different than the World Language Department. And the building principal kind of decides how that's allocated, and the same goes with the high school.
Right.
Um,
Traditionally, at the middle school and high school, they have a supply room.
Right.
And at the elementary school, it's given right to the teacher. So that's the other nuance that's hard to calculate and say, because you're right. I agree 100%. It's better just to say classroom teacher at X level gets this amount, this level gets this amount, this level.
Or even a range
Yeah.
would help.
No, I understand what you're saying, but again, the challenge here, and I think you know this, because, you know, obviously we're in our schools, we're trying to give some of our, we try to provide our principals some autonomy with their money as well. And try to give them the flexibility to use that. But they are very thoughtful, not one level over the other, but I have to say the elementary, again, as Ms. Latour said, they are probably the most consistent in their use. But then, I think middle school probably second, high school is just different because it depends on where they are with their teachers in the departments.
Mrs. Corso?
Special education instructional supplies, does that fall under 611, or does that fall in a different area?
It's under 611.
So I would imagine that they have the more special education students you have, the higher, the more, no? So if a building has more special education students, that they would get a higher allocation, they would get more money, no?
Oh, I see what you're. It goes by student population total, right?
It goes by what the specific students need, so there's some buildings that need more reading materials.
Right,
You know,
right.
so it really depends
Right.
on, we did a full audit this year, a zero-based budget, so it was very specific to very specific students this year.
So back to Ms. Purcell's point, the school that is listed out, that has the lowest cost, the $12,000, they could have the least amount of special education needs as well?
No,
No.
just based.
I
believe mine's separate, isn't it?
It is.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
mine is
separate. Okay.
totally separate, it's not
Okay.
in any of those accounts.
That was my question, okay.
There are certain departments, intervention is one, special education is one, that they have their own budgeting system. And so it doesn't impact the building allocation. Does that make sense?
Budget through PPS.
See, and
So when you, yeah.
the thing is that 611, again, just to go back, if you look on in the munis pages in section 5, there's an organizational code. That is where you look at first, because you're trying to figure out where that 611 money is coming or going to. Is it going to the school? Is it coming from the department? So that 611, it's kind of when we talk about standards and indicators. 611 is the standard, and then when you get to the organizational code, that gets more specific. That's your indicator. That's the area where the money is going to. That's the actual location. So
Well, that would be nice to have. Do we have those?
you have that.
In the back?
You have it section 5. It's all done in
Okay,
there.
thank
And then we have a cheat sheet on the back of what the codes, or in the last page of my budget document.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Any further questions on this page? All right, moving to page 12, Mrs. Levack, you have a question?
Just a comment on object code 690. So often, concern is brought up frequently about taking advantage of joint bidding with the town to save money, and looking at the heating account, this is one example of doing that to obtain a more favorable price for oil. So I think that needs to be highlighted when we're looking at our budget, because we do try to take advantage of those opportunities when we can.
And we do that for oil, right?
Yes, that's what I'm
Is that
talking
what you're
about.
saying?
Yep. Yes. I'm complimenting that we are doing that, and that we are doing that in
Gotcha.
concert with the town, so that we are looking at those opportunities
Good
to
point.
save money.
Good point.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, moving on to page 13. Any questions here? Mr. Ross?
Just a dumb question probably. I know there's no, what's a listening center?
Listening centers, those would be at the elementary for books, students reading and getting books on tape or on recording.
Oh, so they can go and listen to it?
Correct.
Oh,
And they
thank
could
you.
read along with the book, depending on their developmental level.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to 14. Questions here? All right. Seeing no questions. We are completing section 4. And our next, are we taking consensus on this?
I don't, well, I know we had a board member who had to leave.
Okay.
So I think what we usually do next, again, tonight, we usually try to keep our meetings ending around 8, between 8:30. So the next step that we would do is look at the prioritization of the strategic plan items. We might want to table that and start with that next time. And with the goal, if I can be presumptuous, but with the goal that by the end of next meeting at 8 o'clock, we could come to consensus on a budget number that can be adjusted, obviously, if we get more insurance information. But at least I don't know if there's a necessity for additional workshops. Just because we're going to have time. We have an operations meeting on the 10th of February that if we have more information, we could share at that, and that could be an item if you want. And then, of course, you have your board meeting.
Okay.
Okay?
So,
Sounds good.
moving right along then, our next area is public comment. Do I have any comments from the public?
Raj Deering of Sharon Drive. I want to make a comment on the discussion surrounding the substitute teachers and the interns. I graduated from Sheehan in 2018, and I noticed that often when we would have a substitute teacher in a classroom, the substitute did not have work to be doing all period. They would spend maybe 5 minutes at the beginning of the period introducing what the students will be doing, then again 5 minutes at the end collecting the assignment, and then would spend the majority of the period without much to do, either reading a book or looking at a smartphone. So I would encourage the Board of Education to look for creative solutions, such as having teachers who do not have students during a given period to cover for a teacher that is not in that day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I hate this thing. Good evening, everyone. What? Amber Unletterly, 344 Main Street, Moran teacher and WEA vice president. Just quick comment on page 1, section 4, object code 111. Cafeteria monitors were mentioned under contractual and certified salaries. The comment was made that they are the part-time people, and I was just concerned about that. I wasn't sure if that's where that belonged in the object code. Just asking. And under that or does it go under non-certified salaries?
They're in both. There's non-certified
Okay.
ones and 112.
Okay, just asking,
yeah.
thank you. Also, section 4, page 4, object code 324. Sad to see reduction in funding for middle schools. I understand the need for cutting back in every department. But personally, near and dear to my heart are the middle school field trips. We've started taking 2 a year. They have been absolutely wonderful for our students. They're going places they haven't gone before. And, you know, that funding for the buses, yes, I understand. We're all trying to cut back. We're all trying, you know, to do our part. But these are some of the best school days of the years for our students. We're bringing other opportunities that they may not have had. And since we looked like we got a little bit of reduction in utilities, they kind of crossed themselves out with that reduction. So I'd like the board, if you would, to please reconsider. Thank you.
The only concern with that, Ms. Ferone, is the fact that in further review, because when this was instituted a few years back, I'll be honest, the impression I had was that there was subsidy also provided for other levels. The middle school is the only level that had been receiving subsidies, and the elementary students go on a lot of field trips as well. So in terms of equity, we would have to be looking at everyone. So if we reinstate this money for the $13,000 for the middle school, we would have to probably double, if not triple that, to add it for the elementary schools. So when if the board wanted to consider adding back the 13, we'd be looking at adding probably back another 39 on top of the 13 to cover the similar opportunities at the elementary level.
Then would we be continuing to require field trips, offering them?
Well, again,
You know what I mean?
The thing is that, you know, I think that the reality is that field trips are good for students.
Absolutely. We can both agree upon
and
that.
I think that there was a variety of reasons why we required them at the middle school. Not just because of the fact that we were paying for it, but because sometimes there wasn't equity between the two middle schools going on field trips. So we had to put it in place that all teachers and all students had those experiences. So that was really the reason for that piece. And to be honest, that was the real reason why we initially funded it, because we were getting some concerns on the part of staff that they wouldn't be able to go on these trips because of the students not being able to pay for their trips, and we didn't want to make that an inhibitor. So the fact is, we funded it to get that seed going, and then when it came to our recollection this year, going through the budget process and talking about Nature's Classroom in particular, we unearthed the fact that there was this discrepancy. So again, we would encourage the teachers, and I know yourself, your
Oh, yeah,
team
we're going.
loves going. The thing is that we would encourage that to continue. And we were just also, I could speak because I know your team well, your team was also, you know, they were very actively involved in helping sure that those trips were rigorous and were academically connected.
Yep.
And so we had that discrepancy, as you know. Remember, there was the fun trip versus the non-fun.
Yes, we have
I
team
don't wanna
building
say-
versus academic.
I don't mean to say non-fun trip, but in the students' minds, the non-fun trip.
Bus ride's the
and-
best part.
And so, you know, because
Yes.
middle school people, we know. So that's why we're trying to clean that up. So we would want to hopefully see that the students would still have those two experiences. We would also offer, if students couldn't afford it, just like we do at the elementary level and at the other levels, that there would be funding provided for those students who couldn't afford the transportation or the cost of the trip, which I already know we were doing for other parts of the
Okay,
trip.
that's
anyway.
important to know as well.
Yeah.
We've had not one but two kids cry.
Yeah,
when
we don't.
passed out the information for the field trip coming.
Yeah,
up.
no, and we would want, and the building principals are aware of that, and we had a long conversation about that. We don't want to take this opportunity away from a student, but we do need to look at it from that equitable lens. But I appreciate everything. I know I could speak specifically for your team that you do to provide these long trips.
Unfortunately, not this year.
Oh, okay,
We may try still.
okay.
Mrs. Corso?
I just paid for a 7th grade, probably team building field trip. So if there is the funding for middle school field trips right now, where is it going? Like, if we're paying for the field trips, I'm paying for the field trip.
Well, you're paying for the field trip. There's two parts to the cost, and we can check on that a little bit closer. The transportation should be covered this year, present year, should be covered by the funds that were allocated through the Board of Education. If there's a cost to the actual event itself, the actual admission to something, that's what's previously been transferred to the parent.
Okay,
So we'd have to look closer into that.
okay.
Mr. Votto?
Aaron, just for, was that trip, wherever they went, was there a cost to get into the place, or?
They're going
Or
in
was it just
March,
bus?
and yes, but I can't imagine the cost of getting and going to this place is, is equal to what I paid for the trip. I want them to go on the trip, I don't wanna, it's an awesome trip, and they're totally looking forward to it. I just-
No, it's
Well,
not,
that
we
was-
wouldn't,
I
we're
would
not
pay
looking.
less if I took my kids there myself
Right, I was
than
gonna
what I'm
ask
paying
Ian
for
the
the
same
field trip,
question.
that's why I'm confused.
These field trips that you say are very good and you go on, is there a cost to go on the field trip besides, not the bus, but to get into wherever I don't know where you go, or what you,
Yes, so 7th grade at Moran this year is going to the Connecticut Science Center
okay?
as the designated academic trip, and the team building trip is to Lake Compounds in June. So we're staying local, that's local for Team 7-1 at Moran.
Yeah. So the kids pay the cost of getting into Lake Compounds?
Yes, and
And the bus, or do we pay for the bus?
it depends on, I don't
Is
run
it
the
first
bus.
come,
No.
first served?
Well, the way,
First come, first served?
I
no,
don't run the
the way
trips.
it's supposed to work, and again, the way it's supposed to work is that the transportation is supposed to be covered through the allocation that is to the principal through his or her account. So that's transportation. The cost of entrance to Lake Compounds or the Science Center was the portion that was transferred to the student and his or her family.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is too, if one team takes more field trips than another.
No,
I mean,
there's
is
only
it
two.
equally-
No, it's only, it's
It's the
equal.
two designated
It was
ones,
two
that's why I said
designated
that.
trips. So if a team decides to go on a fourth field trip or a third field trip,
Okay, got it.
then the total cost goes on the student. So that's where I would that's why I wrote down that note, because I don't know where it fits into the two designated trips.
Okay.
I mean, an increase in cost too, I'd hazard a guess, would include food that the trip is providing, like for the parents, right?
We don't provide
Chaperones,
food.
potentially, if you.
No, I'm saying like that if the parent is paying more than a ticket price for Lake Compounds, it probably has to do because there's usually a lunch that happens there. No.
They brown bag it.
They brown bag, or they bring extra money for lunch, or, and of course, they have the option of getting the school lunch with their POS account
Okay.
ahead of time. We do have to sometimes pay for chaperones depending on the,
Yeah,
on the trip, on
Oh,
the
okay.
place.
Yeah.
For the ratio.
Yeah, the ratio of students
Okay.
to.
The kids have an opportunity to buy the lunch from the school, right?
Yes,
Correct.
that's what I say, through the
Yep.
POS account, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we always have students who take advantage of that as well.
Okay.
Cool, thank you. And any other comments? All right, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Have a
Thank
great
you.
week.